All right, let's dive into one of the most disruptive and, yeah, controversial defense companies out there today, Anduril. It's the brainchild of Palmer Luckey, a founder whose vision for the future of war is as bold as it is polarizing. And that's exactly what we're going to unpack.
So let's just start with a quote that cuts right to the chase. This isn't some polished corporate speak. It's a blunt, no-holds-barred declaration that really forces you to think about who is building our most powerful weapons. It's the kind of thing that makes you just stop and pay attention.
So who is the guy behind a quote like that? To really get what Anduril is all about, you've got to start with him, with Palmer Luckey, and understand the core philosophy that's driving not just him, but his entire company.
You know, when you ask a founder to define their company in just one sentence, you usually get some well-rehearsed mission statement. But Luckey's answer, well, it was basically a direct shot at the entire defense establishment.
The key phrase you have to catch here is spends its own money. See, most defense contractors get paid by the government as they go. It's this cost-plus model. Anduril just flips that completely on its head. They act more like a Silicon Valley startup, putting up their own cash to build what they think the military needs, and then they sell the finished product. It's a massive risk, but it's the absolute core of their entire strategy.
Okay, so if their business model is all about taking on that financial risk, what about their internal culture? What's the one thing that gets everybody at Anduril going? Well, it all comes down to a single, really powerful idea. Effective. I mean, it's a simple word, right? But for Anduril, it means absolutely everything. It's not about just having the coolest, most futuristic tech. It's about being fast enough to actually make a difference in a conflict, cheap enough that you can use a lot of it, and most importantly, reliable enough to work when lives are on the line.
So let's get into the nitty-gritty of how Anduril is shaking things up. What really makes them so different from the big, established players that have been around for decades?
This chart really lays it all out. Because Anduril is using its own money, they can move at like lightning speed. And here's the really crucial part. In the world of government contracting, if funding gets held up for political reasons, the big companies issue stop work orders. Everything just grinds to a halt. Anduril? Nope. They just keep building. They eat that risk themselves so they can keep the momentum going.
Okay, and this brings us to the most controversial part of this whole conversation. I mean, if you're going to shake up the defense world, you have to answer some really tough questions. Where do you draw the ethical red lines? Are there any weapons you just flat out won't build?
So the question was put to him point blank. Nuclear weapons, the most powerful technology ever created, the thing that has shaped global politics for almost a century. Would Anduril get into that business?
And his answer was a crystal clear, totally unqualified yes. His reasoning is pretty fascinating too. He actually argues that nuclear weapons have been a stabilizing force, making a total war between major powers just too terrifying to even think about. It's a very controversial view for sure, but it's central to how he sees the world.
Okay, so if nuclear weapons are on the table, what about the other weapons of mass destruction? The next logical step is to ask about biological weapons.
And here the answer is a hard no. He draws a very clear line in the sand, saying he wouldn't go near biological weapons. He puts them in a totally different category from his stance on nukes.
But there's a third category, and this is where his answer gets really nuanced and tells you a lot about how he thinks.
He basically argues that it's a huge mistake that international treaties ban the U.S. military from using non-lethal stuff like pepper spray in a war zone. In his view, there's no slippery slope from something like tear gas to deadly nerve agents, and he thinks these are tools our soldiers should have.
So Luckey's vision isn't just about what we'll fight with, it's also about where we'll fight. And his predictions for the next battlegrounds, well, they go way beyond the usual land, sea, and air.
First off, the AI race. Luckey thinks the U.S. does have a lead in the tech itself, but as this chart shows, that gap is extremely small. And why? Because China can implement new AI technology across its military and its entire society so much faster than we can. Their speed is a huge advantage.
And get ready for this, because it's a wild idea. Luckey predicts that before we see major wars in space, the next big frontier for warfare is going to be underground. Seriously, he talks about using the Earth's crust as a new kind of ocean, with machines and supply lines moving through it like submarines.
He also sees this fundamental change in America's role in the world. He argues that the whole idea of the U.S. being the world police is basically over. He thinks it's time to become the world's gun store, arming our allies so they can defend themselves instead of us stepping in directly.
And all of this,
It leads us to one of the most important, most difficult questions of our time. As private companies build weapons that are more and more autonomous, who gets the final say on when and how they get used?
Luckey's whole point is that when tech companies try to write their own rules, like banning offensive use of their products, it just creates a total mess. I mean, look at these questions. How do you define offensive or innocent civilian in the middle of a battle? It's almost impossible.
So for Luckey, here's the bottom line. The decision to use force has to stay with our elected leaders and the military's chain of command. That responsibility, he says, belongs to our democracy, not to a corporation's terms of service.
And that leaves us with this final, really crucial question. When a private CEO gets to decide which weapons get made and which don't, are they effectively taking on a power that should belong to the people we elect? It's a question that gets right to the heart of the future of war, technology, and democracy itself.